Welcome back to the Think, See, Listen YouTube channel, where I give it to you raw and uncut and uncensored, unedited, and completely unprofessional. All to give glory to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Part 5, 6. I forget. We're keeping on going. Part 3, Homo sapiens loses control, is where Harari really gets going with his futuristic plans in a chapter titled The Time Bomb in the Laboratory. Now, you might be forgiven if you thought the chapter was about China and the United States experimenting with dangerous bat viruses and how one escaped, causing a worldwide pandemic and killing millions, but you'd be mistaken. Instead, this is what Harari had to say. In 2016, the world is dominated by the liberal package of individualism, human rights, democracy, and the free market. Yet 21st century science is undermining the foundations of the liberal order. Because science does not deal with questions of value. It cannot determine whether liberals are right in valuing liberty more than equality or in valuing the individual more than the collective. However, like every other religion, liberalism too is based not only on abstract ethical judgments, but also on what it believes to be factual statements, and these factual statements just don't stand up to rigorous scientific scrutiny. In Harari's vision, if you like individualism, human rights, democracy, and the free speech, if you like individualism, human rights, democracy, and the free market, you're just a deluded fool, and it's all part of some imagined order rather than a system developed by brilliant, compassionate people over the centuries as the most effective way for us to live together in a manner that is conducive to the greatest good for the largest number of people. If you don't believe Harari is interested in tearing down all these pillars of a civil society, I offer this passage. To the best of our scientific understanding, determinism and randomness have divided the entire cake between them, leaving not even a crumb for freedom. The sacred word freedom turns out to be just like soul, a hollow term empty of any discernible meaning. Free will exists only in the imaginary stories we humans have invented. It staggers the mind that the person who wrote these words is not universally condemned by all the supposed lovers of freedom. One almost imagines they're reading the words of a young Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin, rather than the writings of an Israeli academic. If there's no such thing as free will, how could anybody ever be prosecuted for rape, murder, or any crime? This is a version of hell where nothing is forbidden and all things are permitted. After attacking liberalism all through the chapter, even equating medieval crusaders and today's liberals as similarly delusional, Harari lays it out. However, once the heretical scientific insights are translated into everyday technology, routine activities and economic structures will become increasingly difficult to sustain this double game, believing in science and free will, and we, or our heirs, will probably require a brand new package of religious beliefs and political institutions. At the beginning of the third millennium, liberalism is threatened not by the idea that there are no free individuals, but rather by concrete technologies We are about to face a flood of extremely useful devices, tools, and structures that make no importance for the free will of individual humans. Will democracy, the free market, and human rights survive this flood? It's genuinely comical to read how people like Harari believe that technological changes will bring about these massive changes in society. These same arguments were being made by Zbigniew Brzezinski in the 1970s. The World War II order is breaking down. Highways now link one side of the country to another. People can pick up the phone on the West Coast and immediately call to somebody on the East Coast. We have planes that could take your family to Europe in just a few hours. You can heat your dinner in just a few minutes in a microwave oven. Sadly, none of these technological marvels created the breathtaking challenges the globalists thought they would provoke. In this chapter titled The Great Decoupling, this is where Harari predicts for the 21st century. This is what Harari predicts for the 21st century. 1. Humans will lose their economic and military usefulness. Hence, the economic and political system will stop attaching much value to them. The system will continue to find value in humans collectively, but not in unique individuals. And the third point is, the system will still find value in some unique individuals, but these will constitute a new elite of upgraded superhumans rather than the mass of the population. You can't say that Harari doesn't have big plans. It's just like they're insane. It's just like that. They're insane. The ravings of a dictator in training. One wonders how he might retain the simplest of human relations. Does he tell his significant other he has no free will? I wonder how his partner feels, though, about the whole eternally young cyborg, sexless and non-breeding plan. That must have prompted at least a few discussions in their relationship. If you have been curious as to what people mean when they talk about transhumanism, this is your answer. You will be a biological organism with machine upgrades, and those upgrades will come at the cost of stripping you of what is the most human thing about you. After writing several pages showing how humans will be less valuable to the system in the years to come, and governments will care less for them, Harari documents what he sees as the final threat to liberalism. The third threat to liberalism is that some people will remain both indispensable and undecipherable, but they will constitute a small and privileged elite of upgraded humans. These superhumans will enjoy unheard of abilities and unprecedented creativity, which will allow them to go on making many of the most important decisions in the world. They will perform crucial services for the system, while the system could neither understand or manage them. However, most humans will not be upgraded and will consequently become an inferior caste, dominated by both computer algorithms and the new superhumans. I'm genuinely trying to resist making Nazi comparisons in this book, but it's so difficult when these globalists start using expressions like new superhumans. Harari is enamored of the idea that some people will rule and others will become part of an inferior caste. It's not too much of a leap of wonder if the globalists might decide at some point that this inferior caste no longer warrants continued survival and needs to be liquidated. Harari's messianic fervor appears to recognize no bounds. When people scoff at claims that these globalists are setting up a new religion, they might want to read what they say in their books. The new religions are unlikely to emerge from the caves of Afghanistan or from the madrasas of the Middle East. However, they will emerge from research laboratories just as socialism took over the world by promising salvation through steam and electricity. So in the coming decades, new techno-religions may conquer the world by promising salvation through algorithms and genes. Despite all the talk of radical Islam or Christian fundamentalism, the most interesting place in the world from a religious perspective is not the Islamic State or the Bible Belt, but Silicon Valley. That's where high-tech gurus are brewing for us brave new religions that have little to do with God and everything to do with technology. What does a person do when they realize that all the crazy claims made about these globalists are pretty close to the truth? These globalists do want to dethrone God from his throne in heaven and place themselves in charge. That's not hyperbole, but straight from their own writings. At the end of Homo Deus, Harari provides his 3 main points. Science is converging on an all-encompassing dogma, which says that organisms are algorithms and life is data processing. Intelligence is decoupling from consciousness, and non-conscious but highly intelligent algorithms may soon know us better than we know ourselves. Homo Deus literally means man is God. That is what the globalists are pushing. If there is one thing that religion has done, it is to cause people to consider things outside of themselves. It is religion that caused people to worry about feeding the poor, educating the young, removing people from slavery, and making sure that all enjoy equal opportunity. At its best, religion breaks down walls, requiring people to see others as fellow children of God, all equally valuable. By agreeing that all people have value, there can be no impulse to harm or rid ourselves of them. The more people embrace equality and freedom, the closer they are to God's natural order. When one understands that philosophical underpinnings of a belief in God, when one understands the philosophical underpinnings of a belief in God, it becomes clear that these globalists are nothing less than an opposition force of that belief. What else would you call an opposition force to God other than devils and demons? The 3rd book in Harari's trilogy is titled 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, published in 2018, which has as its first endorser Bill Gates, who wrote, "I'm a big fan of everything Harari has written, and his latest is no exception." One wonders if Harari has written everything he thinks is important about humanity's past in Sapiens and covered our future in Homo Deus. What could there possibly be left to say? I consider 21 Lessons for the 21st Century to be something genuinely different from his 2 earlier books. Has Harari developed a conscience? Is he backing away from the globalists? There is some evidence for this belief. I don't plan to go through all 21 lessons, but will simply hit a few of the more disturbing highlights as he often does. Harari starts out sounding rational, as in this passage. Truth and power can travel together only so far. Sooner or later, they go their separate paths. If you want power, at some point, you will have to spread fiction. If you want to know the truth about the world, at some point you will have to renounce power. You will have to admit things, for example, about the source of your power. That will anger allies, dishearten followers, or undermine social harmony. Scholars throughout the history have faced this dilemma. Do they serve power or truth? Should they aim to unite people by making everyone believe the same story? Or should they let people know the truth even at the price of disunity? I find it difficult to find any fault with that statement. That's been my experience on several occasions. Telling the truth often gets me less power. However, I must point to the fact that some of the most popular figures today with the largest audiences, such as me, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, and Tucker Carlson, are relentless truth tellers. In retrospect, I must disagree with Harari that telling the truth will forever bar you from the halls of power. It just might take the public a little longer to catch up, but the power obtained by telling the truth is more lasting than the power obtained by telling lies. It's difficult to reconcile this passage about truth and power with how, in his previous books, Harari has enthusiastically endorsed the desirability of empires, the stripping away of civil rights from people, and the creation of a caste system of superhumans and the non-superhumans who will be ruled by algorithms and genetic engineering. And Harari seems to take great delight in his claims that even Disney is joining him in his attack on free will. Disney has built its empire by retelling one myth over and over. In countless Disney movies, the heroes face difficulties and dangers, but they eventually triumph by finding their authentic self and following their free choices. Inside Out brutally dismantles this myth. It adopts the latest neurobiological view of humans and takes viewers on a journey into Riley's brain, only to discover that she has no authentic self and that she never makes any free choices. Riley is in fact a huge robot managed by a collection of conflicting biochemical mechanisms, which the movie personifies as cute cartoon characters. The yellow and cheerful joy, the blue and morose sadness, the red and short-tempered anger, and so on. The truly amazing thing is not only that Disney dared to market a movie with such a radical message, but that it becomes a worldwide hit. Perhaps it succeeded so well because Inside Out is a comedy with a happy ending, and most viewers could have missed both its neurological meaning and its sinister implications. Does it seem odd to you that an academic is spending so much time dissecting the plot of a Disney children's movie? It doesn't to me, because stories, especially those told to children, are vitally important to the future of society. As Disney finds themselves under increasing attack by parents in 2022 for what they view as attempts to break up the traditional family, it's interesting to note Harari saw this pattern emerging as early as 2015. What other crimes can be perpetrated against children when you teach them they are not responsible for their actions and should avoid those who try to teach them they are responsible? From Disney's Inside Out, Harari pivots back to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, a book that Harari believes should serve as a blueprint for our world. In this brave new world, the world government uses advanced biotechnology and social engineering to make sure that everyone is always content, and no one has any reason to rebel. It is as if joy, sadness, and the other characters in Riley's brain have been turned into loyal government agents. There is therefore no need for a secret police, concentration camps, or a ministry of love a la Orwell's 1984. Indeed, Huxley's genius consists in showing that you can control people far more securely through love and pleasure than through fear and violence. Harari admires the world government of Brave New World. I think it's important for the regular reader to understand the globalists don't want to create visible incidents of violence against their opponents. However, given what they have written, it's clear to me that their ideology would have no trouble with committing acts of violence in ways that are not visible to the public. But then, Harari seemed to take a detour, making me wonder what has changed in his thinking. The last section of the book is an admirable defense of trying to discover the truth about things, and yet he also expresses a fear that such explorations may not exist in the near future. As technology improved, two things happened. First, as the flint knives gradually evolved into nuclear missiles, destabilizing the social order became more dangerous. Second, as cave paintings gradually evolved into television broadcasts, it became easier to delude people. In the future, algorithms might bring this process to completion, making it well nigh possible for people to observe the reality about themselves. It will be the algorithms that will decide for us who we are and what we should know about ourselves. For a few more years and decades, we still have a choice. If we make the effort, we can still investigate who we really are, but if we want to make use of this opportunity, we had better do it now. When I read this last passage, I detected a lament. The passing of a world of which Harari was immensely fond. As a Christian, I'm always willing to accept a sinner who has seen the error of his ways. It's one of the superpowers of being a Christian. We rejoice over the reconciliation of the greatest sinner, even more than the enduring faithfulness of the regular believer. After the conclusion of the 21 lessons for the 21st century, there is a long interview with Harari which gives me even more support for this belief. If the individual is as unimportant as Harari has been saying in his previous books, why is it that he feels the need to share so much about himself? Here are some selections. In the 21st century, the price to pay for ignorance about ourselves will increase dramatically because governments and corporations are now gaining unprecedented abilities to hack and manipulate human choice. And the easiest people to manipulate are those who believe in free will, because they refuse to acknowledge that they can be manipulated. I don't agree with Harari about the lack of genuine free will in people, but I do agree that there is a great deal of manipulation in today's media environment. In fact, in this interview, Harari does acknowledge that there can be free will, but says that much of what we do is not because of free will, but because of media manipulation. However, our disagreements are likely to be a matter of degree, rather than wholesale opposition. Again, when Harari discusses that negative aspects of Silicon Valley, I agree with much of what he says and find our disagreement lies on what we believe is genuinely on the mind of those in charge in Silicon Valley. But determining the motives of individuals is fraught with uncertainty. We do our best based on the rational interpretation of their words. I'm comfortable saying both Harari and I are guessing as to their true intentions. but it's the best we can do. This is Harari's answer to the question of whether the leaders of Silicon Valley are evil. My impression is that through Silicon Valley, leaders may well be naive and sometimes disingenuous. They are seldom evil. They genuinely believe that their corporations benefit humanity, but they are often unaware or uninterested in the broader economic, social, and political consequences of their actions. Part of the problem is that Silicon Valley is led by genius engineers who know mathematics and computer science very well, but can be quite naive when it comes to history, philosophy, and politics. This is why historians, philosophers, and social critics have a particularly important role today to play. Perhaps I'm reading too much into Harari's comments, but it seems as if he has developed an appreciation of the shortcoming of his big tech gods. They are not the fountain of all worthwhile wisdom. I find Harari coming dangerously close to believing that since none can be fully trusted, the best we can do is let all have a voice in their future, and to the maximum extent possible with a functioning society, allow people to have their freedom. In answer to the question about what love means for him, Harari provided a deeply emotional response. Love is being connected. To love means to be liberated from the obsession with whatever thoughts, emotions, and desires pop into my own mind right now, and instead listen to others and see what is happening with them. It starts with simple things such as listening to somebody else. When you talk with somebody and you care mainly about what you want to say, you can't really hear that person. You are just waiting for the moment he or she stops talking so you can finally get a word in. But when you let go of your own thoughts, you can listen. I'm genuinely puzzled that the same person who wrote of a future in which the ideal human would be an eternally young cyborg, sexless and non-breeding, could have such sentiments. This book is based on the premise that the globalists believe they know better than the average person how to run their lives, because they consider themselves to be a superior caste of human beings. They do not see the value of talking with us. It is sad that the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. It is said, I can't read this right now. It is said that the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. The globalists seem supremely indifferent to the human beings in whose name they are supposedly making their plans. I fail to understand how the writer who wrote so dispassionately of the castration of young boys for their singing voices, or to create a class of eunuchs to guard a sultan's harem, can express such tenderness in his personal relationships. I began this chapter characterizing Harari as a RoboCop for the Empire, a creature of flesh and metal who serves a corrupt dictatorial corporate government. And I believe I have provided abundant evidence to justify this characterization. However, a Christian also believes that each saint has a past and every sinner a future. That is why we pray for our enemies and are eternally vigilant for the earliest sign of a turn away from evil and toward goodness. As much as I believe Harari is currently acting as a RoboCop for the Empire that Klaus Schwab and the globalists wish to establish, I see signs of his humanity emerging and his conscience troubling him. The greatest victory is not to destroy your enemy, but to welcome him back when he realizes the error of his ways. I do not believe the final word has been written as to whether Yuval Noah Harari is a force for good or evil in this world. I will live in the hope that he finds his way back to the light. However, the choice is for him to decide. Unlike the globalists, God does not force you to do anything. One must come to their decisions voluntarily and without coercion if they are to have any meaning at all. Making voluntary decisions is one of the most important aspects of living as a free human being and emerging as one who is calm and at peace with the world. Chapter 6. You probably won't face a firing squad in the Great Reset, but you may be put into a digital gulag. We've spent a lot of time reviewing the writings of Klaus Schwab and other globalists, but what is the evidence that these plans are being put into motion? I think it's important to realize we're unlikely to find an email from Klaus Schwab directing some world leader, like, say, Justin Trudeau of Canada, on how to deal with a situation. However, when we understand the philosophy of the globalists, the question is, can we find examples that appear consistent enough with their views that we can assume their involvement at some level? I believe we can find multiple examples of such efforts, beginning first with the trucker convoy that surrounded the Canadian Parliament in January and February of 2021 in protest of COVID-19 restrictions. This is how the protests were described in Fortune magazine. The brigade of truck-driving protesters from Canada first converged in Ottawa on January 28th, occupying various streets around the nation's capital. The protest began in opposition to the introduction of a mandate requiring all cross-border truck drivers to be vaccinated against COVID-19. According to the Canadian Trucking Alliance, roughly 90% of Canadian truck drivers were already vaccinated, but a minority of truckers objected to the new requirement for drivers hauling goods between Canada and the U.S. As the protests and their convoys spread across Canada, the focus of the demonstration expanded to oppose all pandemic-era mandates, such as mask requirements and COVID vaccine passport check-ins. You might have followed the trucker protests in Canada, but maybe you didn't. I thought the Fortune article did a pretty good job of summarizing how the protests started. Most protest movements start with a single issue, such as the United States with the death of George Floyd in police custody, and then develop into discussion of some larger issues such as police practices across the country and their effect on communities of color. Democracies are born in protest, and it is what gives them vitality. As we have abundantly shown in this book, the globalists are not fond of protests, as they believe there is no reason to talk with their opponents. Did Trudeau deal with the protesters in a way consistent with a globalist approach? You decide. For protesters, the first bad omen for their movement hit on January 5th when GoFundMe suspended Like's fundraising account after receiving police reports of protest violence and other unlawful activity. The fundraiser is now in violation of our terms of service, Term 8, which prohibits the promotion of violence or harassment. and has been removed from the platform. GoFundMe said, adding that it would return the $8 million raised back to the donors. Undeterred by the loss of millions, protest organizers simply switched fundraising tactics. Shortly after GoFundMe shut down the group's main account, 4 protest supporters calling themselves Honk Honk Hodl launched a new fundraising page on crypto fundraising site Tallycoin. The article continues by informing the readers that the crypto site was then shut down by Canada's federal police, and transactions of 30 wallets were all frozen. The government of Canada had, without due process, restricted the financial transactions of law-abiding Canadians. A dangerous precedent had just been set by the Trudeau government, but they weren't finished. Last Monday, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delivered the Freedom Convoy campaign in its final death blow and invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in Canadian history, empowering police to move against the protesters. We cannot and will not allow illegal and dangerous activities to continue, Trudeau said, as he invoked the Emergencies Act, which granted police greater leeway to impose fines, imprison protesters, and tow vehicles blocking roads. The Emergencies Act also compelled financial institutions to comply with police orders to freeze funds associated with designated persons. In this case, protesters with funds hobbled the public sentiment turning against them, and the threat of arrest and financial sanctions looming, the protest movement began to lose momentum. For most of my life, I've considered Canada to have almost the same values as the United States, and yet what Trudeau did to the truckers is appalling. Something one would expect to see in some third world dictatorship. Can you imagine an American president doing something similar to the anti-war or civil rights protests in the 1960s, to the anti-nuclear protests of the 1980s, to the Black Lives Matter protests, riots of 2020? Can this get any worse? Yes, it can, because technology, which can link things together, makes it even easier for the government to shut you down if they don't like the way you're behaving. Imagine a scenario where the Canadian government could shut off the mobile banking of every protester at the trucker convoy, not by researching who was there and contacting their banking institutions. They could simply monitor the cellular GPS of all peaceful protesters as they did for the January 6th protesters and turn off their mobile banking. Now, just imagine if they turned off all their mobile apps, or if we were all linked into central bank digital currency and they deducted social credits or pulled money off their tokenized central bank digital currency. Imagine a world where your every movement is tracked. Your opinions would be analyzed by artificial intelligence, and you could be constantly penalized for wrong thinking. This is the world that the global elites would like to create with the Great Reset. This is not fantasy. This is not unrealistic conspiracy theory. The technology is already there, and this is the stated goal by global governments and the World Economic Forum. In response to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Apple Pay and Google Pay shut off the finances of countless ordinary Russian citizens. Viral photos surfaced of massive lines at Moscow's metro system, showing thousands of citizens unable to access their finances, fumbling about in search of cash for train tickets. This is how it was reported in England on February 28th, 2022. Russians can no longer use their bank accounts with Google Pay and Apple Pay as newly imposed financial sanctions hit the country. Apple Pay doesn't work in Russia. My bank sent a message saying services might not be working due to market changes. A Russian citizen told Metro Co. UK. On Sunday. As of 2020, 29% of Russians reported using Google Pay, while 20% use Apple Pay. Going cashless means your ability to even exist in society can be simply shut off at any time by the government. Do we wonder why Russians might believe the United States is interested in ruining their country? There is a dispute between the leaders of Russia and the West around the notion that we are actively trying to harm the citizens of Russia. How is any of this allowed? Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve Bank explored a digital dollar. From a January 20th, 2022 CNBC report on the effort, the Federal Reserve on Thursday released its long-awaited exploration of a digital dollar but took no position on the issuance of a central bank digital currency. Instead, the central bank's 40-page document explores a plethora of issues and notes that public commitment will be solicited. Fed Governor Lael Brainerd, who has been nominated as vice chair, is the biggest advocate for the project, while other officials have expressed skepticism. We look forward to engaging with the public, elected representatives, and a broad range of stakeholders as we examine the positives and negatives of a central bank digital currency in the United States, Powell said in a statement. Now, this book takes a certain view on how globalists will execute their plans, not showing their hand while working behind the scenes to bring it about. As I read Powell's statements, he sounds like a typical globalist, using language like engaging with the public, elected representatives, and a broad range of stakeholders, which makes me suspect they are further along in their efforts than they admit. China has already rolled out a pilot program for a digital currency as detailed in a January 10th, 2022 CNBC article. China is ramping up its efforts to roll out the digital yen. China is ramping up its efforts to roll out its digital yen to the broader population as the country's technology giants like Alibaba and Tencent jump on board, also known as the ECNY. It's designed to replace the cash and coins already in circulation. It is not a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, in part because it's controlled and issued by the central bank. Bitcoin is decentralized digital currency that isn't backed by any central banks or a single administrator. China's digital yen is a form of central bank digital currency, which many other banks around the world are also working on. Though the Chinese central bank is way ahead of of its global peers, this isn't fantasy land. It's already here, and the elites are just waiting for the right time or incentives to usher into the digital system.